Nick Wilde allowed over 200 dangerous criminals to escape from prison, and Judy often didn't care about rules. She cared about justice and believed in achieving it without a warrant, even if she had to steal and use blackmail to get what she wants. And Mr. Big is the head of the murderous crime syndicate. Today, we're gonna find out what would happen if Zootopia 2 characters were punished for their crimes, and how long would their sentences be if they ended up in prison. Let's begin with Officer Judy Hopps. Some would say Judy's first crime is reckless endangerment during the chase through Little Rodentia. In order to catch the thief who stole a bag of Mendicanthem holoscytheus flower bulbs, Judy follows him into his neighborhood, and the chase was dangerous for the rodents and their tiny infrastructure. But if you observe Judy's actions, she actually did everything she could to save this neighborhood and its inhabitants. She caught the thief and saved innocent mouse Frou Frou from the giant donut. So we're not counting this one, because no matter what the chief of the ZPD says, Judy was a hero. Judy's first crime is a sneaky one. In order to get Nick to help her with the case, she recorded him admitting he makes $200 a day with his hustle, and then threatened to expose him if he didn't cooperate. That's a pretty rough crime for a police officer. Blackmail. But under the circumstances, it was necessary. So now, Nick is having fun working for Officer Hopps, and she doesn't care about the rules if it can help her solve the case. To track down the car which will help them solve the case of a missing Emmett Otterton, Judy decides to trespass onto the private property of mob boss Mr. Big. She also searches the limo without a warrant and justifies her trespassing as probable cause. But Mr. Big won't care if he catches them. Eventually, Judy and Nick search the abandoned hospital facility at Cliffside Asylum to investigate a lab, and they discover the missing animals, including Otterton and Manchas, are being held prisoner by Mayor Lionheart. Justified crime? Yes. But on paper, it's still trespassing. In Zootopia 2, Judy's reckless driving during the chase causes major destruction of property across Zootopia, and ends with the destruction of the statue of one of Zootopia's founders, Ebenezer Linksley. Later, Nick and Judy infiltrate the Zootennial Gala to investigate and prevent potential theft of the Linksley Journal, owned by the corrupt Linksley family. Judy meets the assumed villain, Gary DeSnake, and realizes he's just trying to prove that snakes are not dangerous, and that his great-grandmother Agnes DeSnake is the true inventor of the climate walls in Zootopia, and that she was the person who actually wrote the journal a century ago. Judy, believing in truth and justice, helps Gary DeSnake, and by doing that, she commits a crime, aiding and abetting a fugitive. And in the end, Judy steals the journal. Curious about the secrets of the journal, Nick and Judy go to a hidden underground district known as the Reptile Ravine to talk to a lizard named Jesus who knows the secrets which can solve the case. Crimes? Unauthorized investigation. And of course, by this time, Nick and Judy are fugitives from justice. So, Judy's criminal record spans from blackmailing to stealing. Pretty good for a cop. And what if she was punished for these crimes? 1 year for blackmail, 1 year for trespassing, 6 months for search without warrant, 4 to 7 years for the destruction of property, 1 to 2 years for aiding a fugitive, 1 to 2 years for theft, 1 year for unauthorized investigation, and 1 year for being a fugitive. So her prison sentence would be 10 to 15 years in total. But in reality, nothing would really happen, because as a hero cop that saved the city 2 times and ended the careers of big-time criminals, she would be excused. In the worst case scenario, she would be formally warned to act within the law in the future. And while some crimes like blackmail, trespassing, and the theft of the journal might be waived away, she'll probably be on the hook for vandalism. The property owners would have to sue her for restitution, but the government and the public would step in to help cover the damages. Moving on to Nick Wilde. Pretending to be a caring father to con Judy into buying him a Jumbo Pop, his first crime was false advertising with the intent to defraud and deceive. And you would think his ice cream hustle is a crime, and while it certainly is questionable, this scheme is actually legal. Nick has all the necessary licenses for his business, and when Judy tells him he misled people into thinking that his redwood popsicle sticks came from a redwood forest, Nick argued that he meant
red wood with a space in the middle.
So it wasn't the actual redwood tree, but just wood that was painted red. Clever fox that Nick indeed. But apparently not clever enough. Nick slips up and ends up being recorded on Judy's carrot pen recorder, casually admitting he's been making
$200 a day, Fluff. 365 days a year since I was 12.
His crime?
Felony tax evasion.
And Nick knows the Zootopia IRS is not to be messed with. But Nick's worst crime is breaking prisoners out of jail. While escaping from his cell with the help of Nibbles Maplestick, who created a key from a mop handle, Nick tries to exit but mistakenly pushes a button that opens all cells, allowing the inmates to escape and even steal police cars. It was an accident, sure, but something that big would set off a chain of events and possible crimes that could seriously affect public safety. Terrifying thing, really. And with the additional crimes he committed with Judy, like pickpocketing, trespassing, breaking and entering, unauthorized investigation, aiding a criminal, and being a fugitive from justice, he'd be looking at a long prison sentence. Let's say 3 months for false advertising, 4 to 7 years for aiding escape of multiple prisoners, 1 year for obstruction of justice, and 1 year for endangerment of public safety. Then, 6 months for pickpocketing, 6 months for trespassing, 2 to 4 years for breaking and entering, 1 year for unauthorized investigation, 1 to 2 years for aiding a criminal, and 1 year for being a fugitive. So, at least 12 years in prison for these crimes, if he was convicted. And maybe he would be excused for these, due to his role of a hero cop. But tax evasion? Over $2 million of unpaid taxes would result in 10 to 20 years in prison. But if he was charged, convicted, and jailed, all of which are highly unlikely, he would still receive a pardon and just walk out. The governor pardons state crimes, and the president pardons federal crimes. Since tax evasion is both a state and federal crime, he might face charges at both levels. But again, he's a hero. Pardoning him would be a very popular thing for both the governor and the president to do. Fast forward to Gary DeSnake. His crime is the obvious public disturbance at the gala and the theft of Linksley Journal. It was a serious crime before it was uncovered that the journal belongs to his family and not to the Linksleys. For public disturbance, he might get 6 months if charged, but for theft of an important journal, he'd be looking at 5 to 10 years if charged. But after the discovery of the long-kept secret, Gary would be pardoned because of his rightful intentions. Next, we have Nibbles Maplestick, a twisted conspiracy theory podcaster. Her crimes would be aiding the fugitives and escaping from lawful custody. 2 to 4 years prison time if she was convicted. Gary would be pardoned for his crimes, but Nibbles probably wouldn't even be convicted after the discovery of the truth. Because this loyal and brave beaver helps Nick and Judy solve the case. Her only ambition was justice and to prove her conspiracy theories. Mayor Brian Winddancer, on the other hand, had narcissistic and selfish ambitions. His fear and distrust of reptiles made him work for the Linksleys, who helped him win the elections. He takes orders from them, passing down the orders to the ZPD. His crimes would be abuse of office, illegal cooperation with criminals, and involvement with their conspiracy to destroy the reptile population. If charged, he would be looking at 1 to 2 years for abuse of office, 4 years for cooperation with the criminals, and up to 25 years for Class B conspiracy. But corrupt politicians evade justice easily, so Winddancer would probably be treated lightly for his crimes. And in the end, he redeems himself by switching sides. Captain Hogbottom had a similar redemption arc. She is a good cop and a clear sign of what happens when good cops follow orders blindly. She is ordered to shoot Judy with a poisonous dart during the Burning Mammal Festival, but she hesitates and purposely aims with her blind eye when firing a weapon, indicating that she wasn't fully committed to arresting Nick and Judy. In the end, she switches sides and redeems herself by striking Paubert with a frying pan. Her crimes? Attempted murder and cooperation with the criminals. Her punishment? If she was charged, 2 to 4 years for cooperation with the criminals and up to 25 years for attempted murder. Now, let's focus on the bigger criminals. Anthony Sutley is a minor antagonist, a smuggler and a crook, posing as a shipyard customs inspector. His crimes would be smuggling, customs violations, tax evasion, and fleeing from the police. He's also the one who smuggled Gary DeSnake into Zootopia. Smuggling and customs violations are federal crimes with serious consequences, and the result could be 15 to 20 years prison time. Add a few more years for fleeing and dangerous high-speed chase, and that's another 5. And for tax evasion, up to 5 years in prison. Anthony ends up in prison for his crimes, and later when he sees Nick and Nibbles escaping from their cells, he alarms the guards, seemingly for no other reason than resentment over Nick's involvement in his arrest. When Nick accidentally releases the prisoners, Anthony escapes as well. If he gets caught, that's another 4 years for escape from the detention facility. In the same prison, another prisoner has a story of her own. Dawn Bellwether, the villain of the first movie who attempted to create an anti-predator society by turning the predators savage. She was sent to prison for her crimes. And obviously, she went completely nuts. Classic Disney villain style. Her crime in the second movie? Prison escape. Up to 4 years. And how far will she get before being captured? Probably not far. And in the midst of corrupted politicians, good cops, bad cops, psycho villains, and conspiracy podcasters, of course there must be a place for the feared mob boss of Tundertown district of Zootopia, Mr. Big. His crimes, if they could be proved, would probably get him a life in prison. Mr. Big was the one who helped Nick and Judy while they were fugitives, a risky crime in that situation. But this mouse doesn't care, because he's the boss. Under the RICO law, he could be charged for all the wrongdoings of his crime syndicate, which would involve murder, racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, bribery of public officials, tax evasion, extortion, and probably illegal gambling and loan sharking. If charged under the RICO Act, as a criminal kingpin, he would get a mandatory life sentence, no parole. Mr. Big is maybe a reputed mob boss, but he also demonstrates his honorable ways as the real godfather of Zootopia. But let's move now to the real criminals, the ones without honor and sense for justice, the Linksleys. Catrick and Kitty Linksley, as loyal minions and followers of their father's will, have committed a serious crime, conspiracy and cover-up of a generations-old crime. They are also okay with using violence to achieve their corrupt family goals and to retrieve the journal. In the end, they end up in prison, and their sentence would likely only be a few years long. 3 to 5 years for involvement with the conspiracy, and up to 5 to 10 years for partaking in violence and intimidation of city officials. But their brother Paubert is even more psychopathic and smarter. He manipulates both sides successfully and in the end reveals his true intentions: to destroy the original stolen patent for the city's weather wall system. Paubert's ambitions are driven by his desperate need for validation from his father, and his crimes are calculated and cold-blooded. Once his active and awkward, clumsy Lynx is no longer necessary, Paubert stabs Judy in the neck with a venom injector, throws Gary into the snow, and attempts to burn down the DeSnake family home with them inside. Moments after neutralizing Judy and Gary, he also stabs Nibbles Maplestick, a conspiracy theorist beaver who aids Judy and Nick with the case. Paubert then finds and attacks Nick as well, which leads to an epic fight between the two. But Paubert fails to stab him with a venom injector. He falls from the shattering ledge during the fight, but survives the fall. In the end, Paubert heads towards the reptile ravine to try and burn the patent. He enters a large hedge maze, a perfect homage to a horror film, The Shining. His unstable murder attempts are interrupted when he's captured by Gary and Nibbles. Paubert ends up in prison with his family. For attempted murder, he could be looking up to 25 years in prison. For attack with a deadly weapon, up to 15 years, 5 to 10 years for attempted arson, 5 to 10 years for accessory to conspiracy and fraud, and 2 to 10 years for attempted destruction of evidence. The final combined sentence would probably be 20 to 25 years in prison. But in Zootopia, it may be a different story. And of course, with his charms and manipulative skills, could Paubert manage to escape justice eventually? And talking about escaping justice, his father Milton Linksley successfully escaped it his whole life. He bribed public servants and had influential people in his pocket, including Mayor Windancer, for whom he probably rigged elections. Milton is prepared to do anything to protect his family's stolen legacy. In order to expand Tundertown, Milton plans to freeze and bury a marsh market, a district for aquatic and semi-aquatic marine mammals. He has no issues with mass murders and ethnic cleansing in order to achieve his goals. Milton also commands Mayor Windancer to capture Judy, Nick, and Gary DeSnake. Their capture would probably end in death, so we can count that as attempted murder as well. In the end, Milton ends up in prison, his family exposed for fraud. His crimes would include bribery of public servants, for which he could get 5 to 15 years in prison. Conspiracy to commit genocide, for which life in prison would be mandatory under international law, civil rights violations for which he could get 5 to 10 years, conspiracy would be another 5 to 10, fraud up to 20 years, solicitation to commit murder 10 to 20 years, and solicitation to commit arson 5 to 20 years. Enough for several life sentences, but for Milton, the biggest punishment is the end of his family's influence in Zootopia. And how did the Linksleys come to power in the first place? It was all thanks to Milton's cruel grandfather Ebenezer. He stole Gary's great-grandmother's patent to build weather walls. He then murdered his maid with a snake venom injection when she tried to interfere with his plan, and framed Gary's great-grandmother for the crime. Finally, he took all the credit for himself and became the founding father of modern Zootopia. The result of his deeds was expulsion of the reptiles from Zootopia, forcing them to go underground and hide. For forgery, he'd be looking at 5 to 10 years, life in prison for first-degree murder, 5 to 20 years for framing, then another 15 for bribing and filing false police reports, 3 to 5 years for perjury, 10 to 30 years for forcible displacement, 1 to 10 years per offense for civil rights violations, and life in prison for crimes against animality. Enough crimes even for a possible death sentence. So those were the crimes and punishments of Zootopia 2 characters. Justice is sometimes fast and sometimes slow. Sometimes it takes several generations. Mob bosses and crooked officials often escape it, but small-time thieves and hustlers, they get caught fast. Who do you think deserved the harshest sentence? Let us know in the comments.